Steven, your videos have suddenly become much better than mine. When did that happen? Apparently you have very good, well-researched things to say about video games. I have unresearched things to say about video games, and I hope they're good. Although it seems like people's perceptions of video games and people who play video games are changing these days, one thing that is at least partially still there is kind of a general attitude that video games are for children. And it turns out there might be some precedent for this. After all, games are essentially a low-stakes, simplified version of things that are going to benefit people to know how to do, but take too much skill to learn all at once. So essentially it's practice for real-world stuff. And that's something that children should do. It's healthy, it's nice, it's what I did, it's what everybody does, I think. And the cool thing about video games is that the rules and situations can be rather complicated. Computers can handle some things that, if you're playing in other ways, it's gonna be up to your mind, and that sometimes doesn't work out as well. On the other hand, there are things computers are really bad at. Computers are really, really bad at simulating human interactions, for instance. So whatever games you're playing, make sure you're also interacting with other humans really, and not via computer, because computers do a terrible job at it. But back to the benefits. Since you can have more complicated stuff and potentially more difficult things, it turns out that where video games have kind of settled as far as being games in the traditional sense is sort of for adolescents, I suppose. Use Ocarina of Time as the perfect example. For the first part of that game, you're experiencing the world as a child. You get to explore things, and it's just full of wonder and amazing and interesting and cool. Then all of a sudden you find yourself thrust into roles that you didn't think you were ready for, but you gotta do it. And all sorts of things that might have seemed completely irrelevant or unimportant or too complicated, you are asked to deal with, and if you don't deal with them, you can't do anything. And if that's not exactly how people feel during adolescence, I don't know what is. I bet absolutely everybody watching this video, if you think about the games you played when you were, 10 to 15, through that sort of lens, you'll be able to figure out exactly why it was appealing to an adolescent. And probably you'll also be able to think of some fairly relevant good things that came from it. So for a completely random example, when somebody says there's an 83% chance of something happening, I don't just kind of understand what 83% means, I can sort of feel it, because of Fire Emblem. That game is very much about managing percents, so I sort of have an intuitive sense of what, anywhere between 0 and 100% feels like, and I think that's probably going to be useful to me. Aside from the mental aspect of mastering complicated systems, there's also the reaction time and all that kind of thing, which video games are pretty good for, though I'm not as good at that. So yeah, when you think about video games as traditional games, I find it makes sense which games turn out to be very popular, which ones don't, and why I have more fond memories of some games than others. There's another way to look at games too, and for lack of a better word, it's art. The reason I, and probably a lot of people, enjoy art is it gives you a sense of empathy with other people. Video games do have some strength in that category, though not what most people have figured out yet. But for instance, in Grand Theft Auto 5, one of the playable characters is a guy who, in the past, has used violence to solve all his problems, and it's worked out very well for him until it got him in serious trouble. And you're playing as him trying to restart his life. But the problems are that violence is what he's really good at. And also, it's kind of what he enjoys, really. He was pretty happy with his life before. It just led him to terrible places. And not only does the narrative say that, but if you think about how the game is actually structured, it takes one button press to steal a car. When you aim a gun, it automatically goes to the nearest living human, and if you're being shot at, it only takes one button to find cover. Whereas if you want to make money a different way, say the stock market, you have to either go on your phone or a computer, go to the specific websites for stocks, and then make a random guess. and just hope it works. So in terms of button presses, it's much more complicated, and in terms of enjoyable to do, it's not really that engaging. So in that way, you kind of experience the world how Michael experiences the world, and you probably feel a little empathy for a character that if you just listen to what he says and, you know, traditional character development that you'd see in a movie, you probably wouldn't like him particularly much, but because you understand how he is in the world, he's kind of sympathetic. And I don't know if that's necessarily what everybody else likes in good art, but it's certainly what I like, and I'd like to see a lot more of that in games. Alright, I think that wraps up my thoughts for now. It's a subject I really like to talk about, though, and I don't know where to find people who have similar thoughts about video games from me. If anybody knows, let me know. If not, maybe I'll just occasionally say things on here. I'm probably gonna do a Super Hexagon review, because I think I can make that interesting even if you don't know anything about games. Okay, bye.